Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with If You Like X, You're Going to Love Other Things. And this is group 3 of our comparison game, which is so much fun and which I really think will help you get used to the themes that run through our musical culture, our general practice, how things sound, how things compare when written around the same time, and how they compare to things written either much later or much earlier. And this group has some particularly fascinating comparisons to be made. It really does. We have, as the contemporaneous comparison, Copland's Appalachian Spring, which we all know and love, with Benjamin Britten's 4C Interludes from Peter Grimes. So Appalachian Spring is work A, Britten's 4C Interludes is work B. Now the comparisons to those works, numbers 1 and 2, so you make comparisons, A to B, A to 1, B to 2, 1 to 2, B to D. I mean, you could do them all sorts of ways. And if you look down below at the description, I suggest the comparisons that are worth making, one work to the other. The A work is Carl Goldmark's Rustic Wedding Symphony, a rarity and a wonderful, wonderful little, minor masterpiece, let's call it. I don't think it's so minor. I think it's just a masterpiece. It's delicious, absolutely delicious. And then work B, which you can compare to, work number two, which you compare to work B, the Britten. Since we're in England, we're going to stay in England. We're going to stay in England on the subject of water, Handel's water music. So we've got the 4C Interludes to compare to Handel's water music. We've got Copland's Appalachian Spring to compare to Goldmark's Rustic Wedding Symphony. And what do all of these pieces have in common? There's something they all have in common, then there are individual things they have in common. So let's talk about what they all have in common. First, they were all written to evoke settings that take place outdoors. I mean, this sort of rural, in the countryside, the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the trees, that sort of thing, right? Appalachian Spring is a country wedding, a barn raising, and all of that stuff. The 4C Interludes are music evocative of the windswept English coast, off the coast of wherever the heck Britten did his thing, Adelberg, that whole area. And then we've got the Goldmark Rustic Wedding Symphony. Like the Copland, it's a country wedding. It's a country wedding in Eastern Europe or in Central Europe. But nonetheless, it's a country wedding. Both pieces make use of folk tunes. Both have that wonderful open-air pastoral quality about them, although in their own respective styles, because they were written about, 70 years apart or so. And then we've got Britten's 4C Interludes, the windswept ocean, the coast. You've got the gulls and the sea and then the storm and the whatnot, and Handel's barge music for an excursion down the Thames for the king. And all of these pieces have in common, because they deal with the subject of the outdoors, an open air quality. How do you achieve open air quality? What is open air quality? And then, it's an emphasis on the sound of woodwinds and brass. It's widely spaced harmony that gives you this feeling of a lot of space between the notes somehow. And the emphasis on wind timbres, the sounds that carry well when you're outside. I mean, the violins don't sound too good outdoors normally. There was a period where string quartet recordings from the major labels always featured the string quartet, on a rock over the Grand Canyon or in front of a giant tree or standing around somewhere in the wide open spaces. Just the most awful place you could ever put a string quartet, because they need to be contained in a room. That the sonority of string instruments doesn't carry very well in open air. That's why those outdoor summer concerts are always so problematic, aside from the mosquitoes and the heat and humidity and all of that junk. You have to find a shell. You need something to project the sound of the orchestra out, largely because of the string sections. And that's why in the summer, when you see ensembles in kiosks playing march music and whatnot, they're usually wind ensembles or brass ensembles, because you can hear them outdoors. So when composers want to evoke the outdoors, or they have music that's written to be played outdoors, as Handel's water music was, they emphasize the sound of the wind section, because you'll hear it better. And because of that history, we normally associate those timbres with music out of doors. And all four composers do it. They do it in their different ways. But that's one thing you can listen to in comparing everything to everything else. That being said, the Copland and the Goldmark both illustrate country weddings, specifically with folk music and folk dancing involved rather heavily. The Goldmark is set as a more traditional symphonic type thing. The Copland is unabashedly a ballet, but you have many of the same concepts. The concepts of dance, the concept of folk song, the concept of outdoorsiness. The Britten is, a series of interludes from his opera, Peter Grimes. It's change of scene music primarily, and there are four of them. The one is Dawn, where you hear seagulls and high violins, and then the brass representing the ocean, the swell of the waves, doing this. And then you have Sunday Morning, which is mostly for horns and woodwinds. You hear a lot of birds. There's lots of birds in all of this music. All this music has birds, not the Handel so much, okay? And the Handel, like I said, was meant to be played on a barge excursion down the Thames, so it's not going to sound anything like the Britten. But the concept of music that carries over the water is quite audibly evident in all of these works. So have a listen to them and make the suggested comparisons down below, and just go and have a good time. And not only will you hear some fabulous music and get to know some music you might not be familiar with, but you will simultaneously understand something really essential about the aesthetics of classical music in the Western universe, how you do outdoorsy type stuff. And then when you hear outdoorsy type stuff by other composers, for example, Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony and whatnot, you will immediately recognize the topos, the topic, the style, and what it's supposed to convey to you. There's something sort of marvelous about that, I think. I really do. So keep on listening, friends, and thanks so much for joining me. Take care.